Well, good morning, Harry Ashton.
Good morning to
Here's
you.
Harry.
Mhm.
Plenty been going on during the week in the world. I think, Harry, hasn't there not?
Yes, well, the world seems to be in a very strange shape at the moment, does it not?
It
Um,
does, doesn't it?
the problems all over. I mean, half of Europe seems to be on fire, and what with France and Spain, and now apparently Suffolk is suffering very badly. So,
Yeah, I see that. I think there's more brush fires than forest fires, though, aren't they?
is that threatening towns or villages or?
I don't, not so far, I don't think.
Well, because in France we've lost quite a number of homes.
Actually, I went on to AI and asked them to make a comparison between what we're suffering across Europe with an average Canadian or American year. And of course, although yeah, we are more inhabited with towns and villages closer to the forests,
Mhm.
uh, is uh, in Europe, it hasn't been anywhere near as bad as it always is in Canada and the United States.
Well, I think it's a factor of urban development in different countries. They allow a lot more building in remote places, whereas Britain, it's amazing how well the countryside is protected by not allowing urban sprawl, green belts, and that sort of thing, which of course are under threat at the moment with the proposed building plans to build, how many is it, 300,000, or is it
Yes,
council houses and but
1.5 million over the life of the Parliament, I believe.
is it three? Is it? Yes, I'm not sure how many houses they're going to build, but already Britain has a huge inventory of council houses, I believe. Does it really need more? Um,
It's I one of those reactionary people that say, "Do we?" Because I see the devastation. I mean, in Sussex alone, some of the beauty spots, and particularly where there are lovely little pubs tucked away in the forest, are threatened with new towns. And I say, do we really need to build more houses, or do we need to actually find different ways of doing things, going up or going down, like the Japanese, or are there ways of doing things without ripping away the trees and the birds and the flowers and things?
mhm.
I get quite incensed about this, I'm afraid.
Well,
And the other thing is, Harry, of course, is that when we were younger, uh, families still lived together. They don't anymore. The chicks leave the nest very early and then demand their own place.
well, that's true too. But there are two ways of looking at this. One is, of course, the expanding population requires more accommodation. But what kind of accommodation? Should it be strictly linked to existing urban areas, or should we be using more virgin countryside and destroying, as you say, the beauty of the country,
Yeah,
which is a problem I think in Britain more than it is elsewhere.
yes.
So
I think the old civil service that manages to cock everything up also has a part to play here. It
mm,
really needs to get things right because apparently we've got huge amounts of brownfield sites, which we're not using.
well, I think a lot more building, just natural building, could go on if two things happened. If they reduced all of the red tape and made it more profitable and practical for builders to build houses for private use, private sale, to make a living themselves, and yet to provide a roof over the heads of people who obviously desperately need it because there's a huge waiting list. And and secondly, ensure that the that people fulfill their dream. It was almost the Thatcherite dream of owning their own homes,
Yeah.
as opposed to being in simply in council houses. To give people back a sense of independence, of self worth, of exceeding in their own context. It depends what kind of building we want to carry out to meet social obligation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't deny any of the Thatcherite dream. All I'm saying is, are we looking at the best use of our resources, or are we just, a developer comes along and says, "I've got a piece of land here, I can build 10 houses on it," and the council says, "Okay, go ahead," and then finds out that it's got, yellow-head frogs in it or something.
Well, there are two arguments. One is that a lot of builders, the major building consortia, are sitting on vast tracts of land that they're not wanting to release all at once because they want to keep the price and the value of the land as elevated as possible. And so there needs to be some form of legislation to prevent that, not, I won't say blackmail, but the stranglehold on land development for that reason. But again, the type of housing built, I'm not sure whether it should be council housing. It should be affordable private homes. And these
Yeah.
could be made affordable if there weren't all of these regulatory hoops that you have to leap through and to get building permission.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
But here is another argument, Harry, the use of the word affordable. Because, for instance, there is a controversial, only because they can't find anybody with enough money to develop it, a piece of property in Lewes to be developed. And they're luxury homes. So let's say that they're £500,000. The affordable housing then becomes £250,000 because no builder wants to try and sell a luxury house if in fact his affordable is looking pretty miserable. So in other words, affordable is affordable to whom?
Well, but when you talk about luxury houses, you've gone to the other end of the housing spectrum. I'm just talking about good average houses, well built, that the building costs so much a square foot or square meter, depending on how it's calculated these days. And then the factor that intrudes on that equation is the value of the land. So maybe something could be done to not depress the value of the land, but make it more accessible. For instance, long-term financing, or separate it from the actual building costs, because the builder, he's got his team of workers and he wants to build houses. Whether he builds it on a cheap piece of land or an expensive piece of land, it shouldn't necessarily be part of his goal. I mean, that's why, as I say, many of the big building companies have been buying up land and sitting on it and hoping it'll go up in value, and they'll make their profit off the land, not necessarily much out of their building.
Yes, yes. Well,
what about brown sites? I mean, Britain is absolutely littered with huge areas in cities and on the outskirts of cities, former industrial parks, places where housing could be developed at a relatively low land-based cost.
Well, what's known as brown land. But I used the analogy the other day, and it's something totally unrelated, I forget. But I once was in Chicago. Actually, I've been to somewhere very interesting from your point of view, Decatur, Illinois, which is where Lincoln had his law firm before he set off on the political trail.
Oh, yeah.
And it's south of Chicago. But I went back up to Illinois, to Chicago from Decatur, and took a flight from Chicago to Toronto. and we took off. And underneath, I saw city, 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 and I kept on looking for the end of the houses, and there was no end. It was just end to end housing, if you like. And I
Sure.
thought, oh my God, could I live like that? And the answer is no, I couldn't. So I've crossed Chicago off my retirement list.
Sure. Well, probably even worse is somewhere like Los Angeles. The overall conurbation of Los Angeles is about 100 kilometers across. I mean, you drive from one end to the other. Of course, you go through several towns. It's not just Los Angeles, but it's all built up and massive freeways and what have you. And that's urban sprawl par excellence. No, it depends what kind of development you're doing. If we're talking about brown sites, what about town centres? Town centres, which no longer house the small businesses, the small shops, they've given way to larger shopping centres on the outskirts of town. People drive and tend to not frequent the town centres. They could be revitalised as housing centres.
Well, indeed, they could. And I think that would be good for the towns because the high street is taking a beating, there's no question.
Of course it is. And so there's a use for these properties. But many of course, of the tax structure is such that these are paying very high rates. They're paying business rates when there are longer businesses there. And they could not be superimposed on housing development. They've got to make it desirable and attractive, both financially and physically, to install people there. I'm not saying that going to high rises, just simply develop the existing buildings and make sure that they're properly exploited, used to good purpose.
Anyway, Harry, how's my girlfriend, Marine Le Pen?
Oh, well, she's doing fine. I think she's probably on the inside track to win the next presidential election in France. She is not quite out of the woods yet in legal terms. She still faces a final appeal result as to whether she would go into the presidential campaign wearing an identity bracelet or whatever you call these things. And she's sworn that she wouldn't do that. And of course, that would be an incredible shame for France's leading politician to have some sort of a criminal link. But even if she doesn't run, her deputy, Jordan Bardella, he has got even a higher polling quote than she has. So it looks pretty much like the Rassemblement National is going to pull it off this time. Finally, they've made themselves respectable. Under her father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, they were considered a bit right-wing, a bit marginal. But she's brought them into the mainstream, and even to the mainstream, I would think, slightly to the left. Now, her detractors, of course, declare her as right-wing, as an inheritance and heritage of her father. But no, she's not. She has become, or at least the Rassemblement National has become a workers' party. And they, as I say, they've got a very good chance of winning. The polls show them winning. It shows her getting the largest single block of votes in the first round because it's a two-round election, the presidential election in France. And in the second, in the runoff against whoever the leading opponents are, she polls, varying on the person concerned, quite distinct margin, majority margin over the others. So unless there's a radical shift in French politics between now and 27, which is when the next presidential election is, I think she's going to be the next head of state in France.
Who do you think, Harry, out of the way that parties are beginning to emerge and change, perhaps, who do you think would be best for these French in power after, when is it, in 2 years' time, the presidential election?
I think the same thing has happened in France as has happened in Britain. The main parties have lost their identity. The Conservatives were no longer conservative in Britain. They became conservative wets, almost some of them left wing. And similarly, the the Labour Party became indistinguishable from, the centre of the road people. So they lost their natural audience, and they no longer were a part of the working class, which led to this fragmentation on the left, on the right, with the emergence of Farage and parties like his, or on the left, where the extreme left is gravitating towards the Greens, a more extreme version of social thinking and socialist thinking, I should say, not social thinking. And so the same thing is happening in France. The old parties have lost their sense of identity and have lost their audience with it. The socialists in France is now a rump party. Certainly the former right-wing parties, what you would have called conservative, they've just become very small parties, and the main parties have become people like Jean Mélenchon, La France Insoumise, which are extreme left. I mean, they're almost, I don't know, I mean, communist parties in many ways, and they're garnering a large part of the French electorate, and the same thing on the right with the other parties. So politics, the shape of politics is changing in both countries. In Germany too, the AfD is forging ahead in Germany, and Germany's post-war constitution prevents it going too far to the extremes. In any case, the balance of the German Democratic Republic, not Democratic Republic, the German state is such that you cannot really have given sufficient power to the Länder, the different divisions, to prevent a central government becoming too extreme. But that doesn't exist. That structure doesn't exist in France and Britain. So I think we're going to see some rocky road in politics over the next few years. And whether it's Farage or somebody like him that comes in, I think we've got to be careful. And we've got the socialists in power at the moment with a last opportunity to put things right. And we'll have to watch and see what Mr. Burnham does, and with a lot of nice words and giving people a warm feeling in their trousers with his political promises. Or whether it's and somebody has to pay for it in the end of the day. So yeah. I think we'll be seeing some quite dramatic developments in both Britain and in France in the next 2 years.
I was trying to figure out what my own reaction is to Andy Burnham. I mean, first of all, he's coming with a splurge of giveaways without explaining how he's going to pay for them. So that could be an albatross lower down the scale towards the next election. But my view of him is that he's somebody who needs to be loved, and I always worry about people who need to be loved.
Yeah.
I don't know what's your basic reaction to Burnham the man?
Well, he's inherited a huge majority. I mean, it was a landslide Labour win, no question about it, under Starmer, and that majority is something of an embarrassment because, again, it's such a broad church now, the Labour Party in Britain, that he's almost beholden to his backbenchers. He has the sword of Damocles to hang over them, though, because all of those who say they're not going to go along with him if he tries to carve into this ridiculous and ever-expanding welfare budget, and they shall vote against him, well, he just simply has to call an election, and most of them would be chased out anyway. So he said, if he's got any guts, he'll say to them, look, you go along with my welfare reforms, if he's inclined to do welfare reform. Let's imagine that he is, because it's the only source of money that he'll find sufficient funds to meet all his future obligations or his promised obligations. And so to get those welfare reforms through, he's got to dominate the backbenches. And And he said, "You'll either say to them, either you go along with me, or I get rid of you by calling a general election." In which case, Labour, on the Burnham bounce, could probably get back in with a much reduced majority, but he'd get rid of all of those nutcases in the back benches that are preventing reform.
How is the IMF looking at Britain now? Because it was while Starmer was there was some talk that it was ready to intervene.
Well, the IMF is certainly got Britain under the microscope at the moment, because there's a very strong possibility that if some of these programs, unfunded programs, push Britain over the edge, they'll have to come in and get a bailout similar to the one we had under the previous socialist government. Not the previous one, that the back in the, when was it, the 70s, yeah. So I think they've got very close eye on us, the IMF. We're a candidate for draconian treatment if they step in. And then there'd be a reform of the welfare system for sure.
Right. Let's turn to while we're talking about personality politics. Let's talk to about Mr. Trump, because he's finding the weather rather rough, is he not?
Well, I think Trump has passed his sell-by date. In his first term, Trump is a pretty faithful character. Let's be honest, an awful man. But he, during his first term, he had some reasonably good ideas of trying to put the United States, and to a degree, by extension, the world, back on the right track. But he's gone overboard, I think, in his second term, and has launched himself into adventures, not the least of which, of course, is Iran, and shown that he hasn't got the overall grasp of the situation to know how to get himself out of the glue that he's got himself into, and he's coming up against the midterms shortly in November, I believe it is. And he could even lose a majority in Congress, and both in the House and the Senate. And so it's I think his days are spent, and he's thrashing around wildly to try and find a solution to some of the problems he's got. Which again takes us back to the Iran situation, and it's difficult to know what he's going to do there. And he's distanced himself from his various so-called allies. It's become a person that not to be trusted. It's a black period, I think, for the United States at the moment, and they'll be ostracized by many of the European countries that will be obliged to stand on their own feet and look after themselves, their own defenses, their own economies, and not to be able to rely on the Americans. I mean, you could not, at this moment, rely on America for anything.
Apart from Britain, which European countries are vulnerable in terms of their economy?
Well, the ones closest to Russia, I suppose, because Russia has got territorial ambitions. They're stalemated at the moment in Ukraine, but that doesn't stop their desire, or at least Putin's desire, to recreate the old Russian Empire and expand into Europe. And of course, they've got the means and the manpower and the weaponry to do it. We haven't. I mean, we don't have an army anymore. I mean, I'm told that the British Army could fight for 1 week before, that's its sustainable military capability, for 1 week. and particularly if you get into heavy losses, such as in the Ukraine theater, and the states that are bordered on Russia, of course, have been arming very rapidly. Poland and Hungary and others. So they'd put up a fight, but I don't think Russia's ambitions are at all thwarted. I think they're stymied in the Ukraine at the moment, but it doesn't stop their dreams of total hegemony over of the old the territories that they controlled after World War II.
Yes, yes. Um, is Putin? I mean, people talk about possibly, you know, an uprising within the government itself to displace Putin. He seems to me to be pretty solid. How do you feel about him?
Well, he's in a difficult position. There could be a palace revolution in Russia, but there's no indication that that would be one that would calm the game. You get maybe even more extreme people who would want to go nuclear, who would want to go into a mass, call up militarize the nation completely, because at the moment the very large Russian middle class has been kept out of the war. They're getting it's coming home to them a little bit now with longer range weaponry on the part of the Ukrainians, and they're beginning to see that things are not going well. But their sons and daughters haven't been caught up in the maelstrom yet. But once they are, and they could be by a more extreme government, and I think there's more of a chance that Putin would be replaced by somebody worse than him, than more benign. That's the danger.
Yes, go on, carry on.
And so, no, it could be extremists could take over the Kremlin, and that would be a bigger problem, because Putin is drawn back from certain risks and is still trying to play the international statesman role. He's got, he seems to have Trump over a barrel. I don't know whether he's got some compromising photographs of Trump in somebody's bedroom or whatever, but he seems to be playing that role too. But he's far from a totalitarian dictator such as we've got in China and in North Korea and other countries in the world, or ideological outfits like the Iranian regime. He's almost approachable in his extremism, where his replacements could be difficult, many times more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, we all look with some awe at the Russian Federation, and if it did manage to take back some of the old Soviet Union satellites, but is it really economically viable? Could Putin expand his military ambitions and get away with it?
Well, much of the Russian economy, as we know, is based on petroleum products, and is being squeezed at the moment with sanctions and inability to export those products, except with his shadow fleet of Russian tankers and that sort of stuff. But this is still quite a potent force to be reckoned with. That said, I mean, that takes our focus away from China, which is very much the greater threat, both in the intermediate and long term context. And so, if it isn't Russia, certainly we're going to have to be dealing with China, if we're not already dealing with China. I mean, with our totally stupid net zero project in Britain, which has impoverished the nation when we produce well below 1% of the world's emissions, and they've increased their emissions 300% since 2000, and they now account for 1/3 of CO2 being dumped on the planet. And we're just destroying our industry, our economy, and financial well-being with this ideological nutcases like Miliband and this woman that's replaced him.
Yeah. I mean, they can't seem to get that right, can they?
Yeah.
But presumably, even though viewing the Chinese as we do, as being economically very powerful, first of all, India is coming up on the outside rail, and also, once again, they must have their own internal problems that they've got to deal with.
Well, all countries have their own particular set of challenges, and India, with its hundreds of different languages, cultures, and social stratas, has one, but it has been quietly emerging all along, and is becoming stronger, and the quality of well, I won't say the quality of life, but the standard of living is improving remarkably in India. So, no, I think they're a power, very much of a power to be reckoned with in the future, and probably the long-term rival to China.
All right. Militarily, how's the case in North Korea doing?
Oh well, I think he's almost a creation of the Chinese in many ways. Going back to the Korean War, and they do have the capacity to keep him on a short leash if they wish to. But he serves, I think, as the cutting edge of a visible Asian threat to keep the Western world in line to a certain degree. But I think I still believe it's the Chinese who pull the strings, call the shots in the case of North Korea.
Incidentally, one of the programs that I enjoy, particularly if I can't sleep at night, is MASH, the hospital program in South Korea during the South Korean War.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's very amusing, but in some ways, of course, it reflects our Western thinking at the time of the Korean War, and we forgot the Korean War. What 60 years ago, was it not?
Yes. Well, that's on British television, I take it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because we can pick up British channels here, and but I tend not to watch them. I tend to watch more French television than anything else.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Is French television okay?
Yeah, but then again, I think I watch less and less television.
Yeah.
I understand that the standard television viewing audiences are in retreat, and many of these new outfits like Netflix or whatever they're called, and they're the growing part of the audiovisual industry, and the traditional television they're losing ground.
Yes, indeed. I mean that is very true. People do want to be able to pick when and where they want to watch television, but then secondly, I don't know whether it's something you alluded to, and that is people are pretty fed up with the mess that the world is in, and rather than watch the news at 10 on Netflix, they can watch sort of the Crusades or some series where they can see knights in armor dashing down hills.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, that brings us into focus the whole question of the BBC losing what ground, losing public support, being less of a national institution, and more questioned because of its political stance, and whether the license fee and all the rest of it will continue, or whether that will all be revised. And to the degree that whereas BBC News used to be the gold standard, I think, of reporting, both national and international reporting, it's suffered quite a few setbacks recently, and we're looking at even this Trump court case against the BBC. I mean, that's still to hit the headlines in a big way. And when it gets going, I don't know how long it'll be before that really gets into the courts, but that could be quite dramatic if he's even partly successful in his attack on the BBC.
Well, I mean, the BBC is a victim of its own folly, really.
Yeah.
It cannot change its internal processes to meet a very different type of viewing world out there.
Mm.
And not least of which is, its attempts to try to show that it's following government policy and that everything is fair and so on. I mean, they still carry on with this broad issue where a job comes up and Harry Atherton wants it, and Harry is working for the BBC, and the BBC say, "Okay, Harry, we want you as well, but you've got to come and have an interview, and there'll be 3 or 4 more people." Everybody knows who's going to win. I mean, it's an absolute farce. But they go through it, and in the process, sometimes turn down very, very talented people.
I'm sure they do.
It weakens the whole process.
And to what degree are politics in there? I mean, the big question is the BBC left wing?
Well, I won't get into that debate, but I would say that there is certainly an internal censorship about some things. For instance, I mean, people writing to the newspapers and the magazines point out that there are certain stories that the BBC just didn't touch. Even though they turn out to be very important stories in other media. And that, they make up their mind about people like Farage. Well, you've got to be right down the middle, and you've got to be without fear or favor to run a very good news operation. And they always did, but they don't anymore.
Well, when I talk about the BBC asking the question, I'm not saying it is. I'm just asking the question: is it left wing? I don't necessarily mean in a political sense, but in a philosophical sense. Is the mindset of the intellectual classes of the BBC, and there certainly is a BBC intellectual mindset, I think, is that bias left? Is it all into many of the new philosophies and the new ideologies? I don't mean politically. I don't necessarily mean at the ballot box, but in their way they perceive the world.
I think you hit the nail on the head, Harry. I think it's a question that needs to be asked, and we need to try and find some answers. When I was at the BBC, you could bump into 1 in 5 people that you would talk to that you didn't know but were colleagues who would say, "Oh, well, of course, the BBC exists because it's the BBC." In other words, it's an entity that stands away from everything else that we know and makes its own rules and regulations. And as an employee, you must not question that.
Well, like a religion, almost like a religion. You became part of a religious sect if you worked for the BBC, and if you had certain views, and I suggest if those views were right wing, you had to keep them hidden.
Absolutely. And the BBC is like a liner at sea. You can turn support, but it takes some time for the ship to actually turn its nose to port. And if you turn it back, it takes time to get it back to the centre. And the BBC is the same. Once it's swinging one way, you can't get somebody in that's new who's going to swing it back the other way.
Well, that's a very valid analogy. I mean, the one that's often given in naval terms. It takes 5 miles to turn an aircraft carrier around.
Right.
And
Well
the captain giving the order to the actual ship going in the opposite direction. I don't know whether that's technically correct, but it seems quite believable.
well, I mean, you were in the airline industry, as indeed I was for a while, and the same applies to 747.
Mhm.
You turn the stick, but it's some time before the nose starts to go around, and to
Mhm.
bring it back you better be in a hurry because it takes equally the same amount of time. And
Yeah.
I went to Crane Bank on occasion, which was the training centre for British Airways, and got into a simulator and managed to land a 747 on the roof of Terminal 3.
Well done. Well done. Mhm. Yeah, yeah, that's good.
Uh, like Harry, I like to stay up with what used to be the Asian tigers, but also Japan. And how are things going there?
In Japan,
Japan
oh,
and some of the other Asian countries. You know, I mean, we don't hear much about Singapore at the moment. You know, which was the economic miracle.
no, well, I think the economic miracle in Singapore is still going very strongly. The comparative one of course, Hong Kong, the two centres. China had promised to leave it as a freewheeling economic entity when they didn't, and they've intervened and they've they've clamped down on freedom of not just politics, but of commercial endeavors, and so that's the shame. No, Singapore, I think, is still cooking with gas. The sad story is that of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Lost its freedom, lost its freedoms, and can no longer, play the role that it used to play, which is a shame because it was in China's interest to have a foothold in the Western economic world, and they've given that up, and so mind you, they've become sufficiently powerful. They've got sufficient economic clout now to impose their will or sell their goods, their electric cars or what have you in certain wide open markets like Britain, and destroying the British car industry in the process. But that's the fault of people like Miliband and others.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, it's nothing like jumping into a market that's destroying itself, is
Mm-hmm.
it? Okay, Iran, because any signs of peace keep disappearing. The Americans and the Iranians sign a peace deal, and within 24 hours, it's been broken by one side or the other.
Well, the peace deal was simply um, just a curtain to hide the reality of what was going on behind the scenes. And Trump wanted out of that war. He realized he'd got himself into a difficult situation. And of course, the Iranians simply wanted to buy time. And by buying time, they won. It meant that they had not been defeated, which to them is victory. And so the war has resumed, so-called war has resumed, and the Americans are go to great pains to say they're still hitting military targets. But you can't fight a military war by just bombing military targets. You've got to get boots on the ground. Well, that would be unacceptable to the American political and public establishment.
Yeah.
So the only way they can bring Iran to heel is to knock out civilian infrastructure. And I suspect that some of the bombardments are beginning to do that, knocking out bridges, power plants. I don't think yet desalination plants, but to actually undermine the economy and their ability to keep moving on a day-to-day basis. And of course, the inflation is now rampant in Iran, and they cannot go on much longer if Trump kept up that kind of pressure. Now, has Trump got the will and the means, because we're talking about running low in ammunition and that sort of stuff, to pursue that goal to its logical conclusion? I think the next month will be critical in the Iranian situation. I don't think we're going to go much before a month before one side or the other cracks.
And how about Netanyahu? What influence does he continue to have?
Well, he's facing a resurgent left-wing challenge, and in the upcoming elections, he could be in serious problem with a serious problem. He's been a prime minister off and on for, gosh, best part of 20 years, I think, and
Right.
he and of course the Israel is being blamed for all of the wrongs of the Middle East. I mean, goodness knows how that has come about, but still, they try to defend themselves against everybody trying to wipe them off the face of the map, and then they suddenly become the villains of the piece. And so I don't know. I mean, if there's a change of government in Israel, I don't think it'll necessarily be a change of philosophy. It's still a nation fighting and knowing it needs to fight to sustain itself, to sustain its very existence. And so I don't think that'll change politics to a large degree. And I think in many ways, Israel isn't a right-wing country. I think there's a very strong socialist thread that runs through Israeli politics. But I think if that develops dramatically over the next series of elections, I think we could see Netanyahu out definitively. Finally, he will. And then, of course, he's going to have all sorts of problems because people are going to try and launch legal actions against him for some of his decisions made when he was in power, which I think is wrong. But anyway, that's something for the Israelis to sort out amongst themselves.
Oh. Harry, we don't very often touch on Africa, Australia, supported by New Zealand, South Africa, that is part of that economic band in the Pacific countries. What's happening there? Is it just pottering along, or can we see a increase in importance of any of these countries or continents?
Well, I think Africa has got a tremendous amount of natural resources and a very active economy. It's in many ways its own worst enemy because they're still trying to evolve into a non-apartheid country. But no, they're in pretty solid shape, and of course they've got the world's best rugby team. So I don't know a lot about South Africa, but I do feel that it's early days yet. It's early days. It very often takes 100 years for a country to evolve and develop its full potential, even with the pace of change that you have in the modern world. But I don't feel that I need to be worrying about their future. Other parts of Africa, yes. Again, I'm not an expert on Africa. I'm more South America and North America and to a degree Europe in my background. But obviously, Africa as a whole is a sleeping giant. Yeah. Massive resources. And if they get their act together, then they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Combining two subjects here. That is why there's been enormous economic and philosophical penetration in Africa by China.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I always think of Australia as a small country for some reason, whereas in fact it's a continent. Now, what's happening there? Could Australia develop into unexpectedly some sort of economic power?
Well, I think Australia is beginning to flex its muscles in that part of the world, and they are they're acting as almost contrary to certain Chinese encroachment in what they consider their backyard as well, and they're coming of age. I think they're going to be a, um, a geographical presence, I suppose, and to a degree a political force to be reckoned with. Um, and It seems the Australian economy is doing very well. You know, similar similar problems to everybody else, but no, I think the future of Australia looks very bright.
Right, Harry, we've been at this for 50 minutes. We've got 5 before we have to go. What have you, or what would you advise viewers to watch for this coming week and over the coming months?
I think that we're going through, believe it or not, a quiet political period. It's almost like a calm before a storm. Everybody is distracted by stalemate in Iran, the massive fires in Europe that are dominating the headlines. It's almost as if there's a vacuum waiting for a major news event to happen. Now, it would be much smarter guy than myself to forecast that. But I do feel there's been a dearth of heavy news in the past couple of months or so, and it's not natural because news, as you've been in the news business all your life, it comes in waves. And we're in a trough at the moment, so we can expect to move up into a peak. Based on what? Your idea is as good as mine.
Just returning to the forest fires, the rallies in Europe, I was doing a little bit of research for a bit of a program on forest fires and so on. And I came across really Canada has done extremely well in terms of fighting fires from the air. And in your time there and my time there, one of the great marvels was the Mars water bomber.
Well, the Canadair water bomber has been the staple equipment for fighting fires all around the world. But question is, the French themselves have developed a new water bomber, which apparently is much more performing than the Canadair. So Canadair's, control of that market may be slipping, and with I hate to use the word global warming and threats of forest fires and less than adequate forest management, I think that we're going to see more and more of this, an increasing number of fleets of these aircraft. So there's a huge market there, and if there's a market that's to a commercial interest, yes, it will lead to development of other water bombers. They're even using the Airbus 400 to drop fire retardants now. It's a whole new field, aerial bombardment of forest fires.
Yes, and watching this, I thought, oh look, that water loses a lot of its power because it strays on the way down. But in fact, when it hits the ground, it does a remarkable job.
Oh, indeed, yeah. Well, that's a question of altitude, and of course, you've got to remain safe. You've got to, because when an airplane discharges such a massive amount of weight, its aerodynamics obviously are immediately affected, and so you need the room to regain stability in the aircraft.
And you need very specialist crews too.
Sure.
When it picks up the water, it suddenly takes on huge amounts of weight, and it's got to get off the damn lake again.
Indeed, indeed it does. Yeah. Hmm.
Harry, always a delight to talk to you.
Hmm.
You'll be back next week.
With pleasure. Yeah. Hmm.
We say that there's sort of a twilight period at the moment in world politics and world activity and world economies. But as they say, a week in politics can be a long time. And who knows what we'll be sitting here and analysing this time next week. It all could change quite dramatically. So it'd be interesting for us to return to the battlefield.
Indeed. Well, this dearth of world news could well, this vacuum could well be filled. If nature abhors a vacuum, just as news does, so something major could happen between now and next week.
Absolutely.
And so we'll have lots to talk about, I'm sure.
Good to see you, Harry. I'll see you next
week. Take care. Right. Bye for now. Bye.